Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today, we are exploring a fascinating idea that quietly shapes the world around us: how history often repeats itself, not through identical events, but through familiar patterns of human behavior. When people think about history repeating itself, they usually imagine the same wars, the same leaders, or the same disasters happening again. But in reality, history rarely copies itself so directly. Instead, it echoes. The details change, the names are different, and the technology looks more advanced, yet the choices people make remain surprisingly similar. Across centuries, humans have shown consistent patterns. We chase opportunity during times of growth, become confident during periods of stability, and overlook warning signs when everything appears to be going well. These patterns are not written into history books as dramatic turning points, but they quietly shape the outcomes of entire societies. What makes this repetition difficult to notice is that each generation believes its situation is unique. People often assume that modern knowledge, advanced tools, and past lessons make repetition impossible. However, human nature does not evolve as quickly as technology. Fear, ambition, pride, and optimism influence decisions today just as strongly as they did hundreds of years ago. When these emotions guide choices on a large scale, familiar patterns begin to form once again. History does not repeat itself because people forget facts, it repeats because behavior remains consistent under pressure. When comfort replaces caution, when success breeds overconfidence, and when early warnings are dismissed as exaggerations, the stage is quietly set for familiar outcomes. These moments rarely feel historic while they're happening. They feel ordinary, even harmless. As we begin today's journey, keep this thought in mind: history is not a straight line moving forward. It is a series of patterns, looping quietly beneath the surface, waiting for us to notice. And sometimes, the most important lessons are the ones that repeat without anyone realizing it. Throughout history, one of the most repeated patterns is how societies respond to warnings. Again and again, signs of trouble appear: early economic stress, social tension, environmental strain, or political instability. These signals are rarely invisible. In fact, they are often discussed openly. Yet they are frequently ignored because responding to them feels inconvenient. Short-term comfort has a powerful influence on collective decision-making. When daily life feels stable, people prefer to maintain what they have rather than change course. Adjustments require effort, sacrifice, or uncertainty, and those costs are easy to avoid in the present moment. As a result, warnings are postponed, softened, or explained away as unlikely scenarios. Leaders are not immune to this pattern. Many decisions throughout history favored immediate approval over long-term stability. Addressing deeper problems often means unpopular reforms, reduced growth, or stricter rules. When consequences are not immediate, it becomes tempting to delay action and hope that future conditions will improve on their own. What makes this repetition so subtle is how reasonable it feels at the time. People do not believe they are ignoring history. They believe their situation is different. New systems, new technologies, and new ideas create a sense of security that past societies lacked. However, comfort can distort judgment. When life feels predictable, urgency disappears. By the time consequences become impossible to ignore, choices are limited. The cost of inaction has already accumulated. History shows that many major disruptions were not sudden events, but slow developments that could have been addressed earlier if warnings had been taken seriously. This is how history repeats itself quietly, not through dramatic moments, but through delayed responses. The lesson is not that warnings are always correct, but that comfort often convinces societies not to listen until it is too late. Economic history is filled with moments of excitement followed by sudden collapse. While the industries, currencies, and technologies may change, the underlying behavior remains strikingly consistent. Periods of rapid growth often create a sense of certainty that progress will continue without limits. As prices rise and opportunities multiply, caution slowly fades. People begin to believe that this time is different, that traditional risks no longer apply. Early successes encourage more participation, and optimism spreads faster than careful analysis. What begins as reasonable confidence gradually turns into widespread overconfidence. Warnings usually appear during these moments. Some observers point out unsustainable growth, unrealistic expectations, or increasing inequality. However, during economic booms, warnings often feel out of place. When rewards are immediate and visible, restraint can seem unnecessary, or even foolish. This pattern repeats because human psychology remains constant. The fear of missing out can be stronger than the fear of loss. When many people are benefiting, it becomes emotionally difficult to step back. As a result, systems grow fragile beneath the surface, even as they appear strong from the outside. When conditions finally shift, the collapse often feels sudden, but it is rarely unexpected in hindsight. The crash is not caused by one single event, but by accumulated risks that were ignored over time. Confidence disappears just as quickly as it formed, revealing how unstable the foundation had become. History shows that economic crises are rarely unique. They follow familiar stages of enthusiasm, expansion, denial, and correction. The repeating lesson is simple yet difficult to accept. When growth feels effortless, caution matters most. Without it, prosperity becomes temporary, and the cycle begins again. Throughout history, political systems rarely collapse overnight. Instead, they weaken gradually as trust between institutions and the public slowly erodes. This pattern has appeared across different cultures, time periods, and forms of governance, even when the surface details seem entirely different. At the beginning, small compromises are often justified as necessary or temporary. Rules may be bent to maintain stability, loyalty may be rewarded over competence, and transparency may be reduced in the name of efficiency. Individually, these choices seem manageable. Collectively, they begin to reshape the system itself. As corruption becomes more normalized, public confidence weakens. People may not immediately lose faith in leadership, but uncertainty grows. When trust declines, participation fades. Citizens disengage, believing their voices no longer matter. This creates a gap between those in power and those affected by decisions. History shows that when accountability disappears, systems become increasingly fragile. Leadership may rely more on control than cooperation, while criticism is viewed as a threat rather than a warning. At this stage, reform becomes difficult, not because solutions are unavailable, but because admitting failure feels too costly. What makes this pattern repeat is the illusion of permanence. Political systems often appear stable right until they are not. Because decline happens slowly, it is easy to mistake familiarity for strength. Many societies assume that past collapses happened due to extreme conditions that no longer apply. Yet the lesson repeats: when corruption grows and trust fades, even long-standing systems can weaken from within. Collapse is rarely sudden, it is the final outcome of years of ignored signals. History repeats itself here not through chaos, but through gradual decay that goes unnoticed until change becomes unavoidable. Technology is often seen as a solution to humanity's past mistakes. Each new invention promises efficiency, connection, and progress. Yet history shows that while tools evolve, the challenges surrounding them frequently repeat in familiar ways. In many eras, new technologies arrive with optimism and high expectations. They improve communication, increase productivity, or expand access to information. At first, these changes appear overwhelmingly positive. However, as adoption grows, unintended consequences begin to emerge, often echoing older problems rather than eliminating them. New systems can amplify existing inequalities instead of removing them. Access to advanced tools may be uneven, creating new divides between those who benefit and those who are left behind. Information spreads faster, but so does confusion. Influence becomes broader, but accountability can become harder to define. History reveals that societies often focus on what technology can do, rather than how it will be used. Regulation and ethical guidelines tend to follow innovation instead of guiding it. This delay allows patterns of misuse to form before meaningful boundaries are established. What makes this repetition difficult to notice is the appearance of novelty. Because the tools look new, the problems feel new as well. Yet beneath the surface, familiar behaviors remain: competition, control, misinformation, and the pursuit of advantage. Technology changes the scale and speed, but not the motivations. Rather than replacing old challenges, progress often reshapes them. Past struggles over power, influence, and trust reappear in digital or automated forms. History repeats itself here not because technology fails, but because human behavior adapts faster than responsibility. The lesson is not to fear innovation, but to recognize that progress without reflection can recreate the same cycles under different names. When new tools arrive, history quietly asks the same question again: have we truly learned, or are we simply repeating ourselves with better machines? Across thousands of years, empires have risen in different regions, under different names, and with different cultures. Yet when viewed from a distance, their life cycles often look remarkably similar. Expansion, strength, and confidence are followed by overreach, strain, and eventual decline. Most empires begin with efficiency and unity. Strong leadership, shared purpose, and innovation allow rapid growth. Early success reinforces the belief that expansion is both necessary and sustainable. Resources increase, influence spreads, and the system appears resilient. Over time, maintaining this growth becomes more difficult. Administrative complexity increases, costs rise, and borders stretch further from the center of control. What once felt manageable begins to demand constant effort. To preserve power, systems grow rigid, prioritizing control over adaptability. History shows that overconfidence plays a key role in this stage. Success creates the assumption that decline is unlikely or impossible. Warnings about internal weakness or external pressure are often dismissed, as past victories dominate collective memory. As challenges accumulate, responses tend to focus on preserving appearance rather than addressing causes. Short-term solutions replace long-term reform. Inequality grows, public trust weakens, and institutions lose flexibility. Decline rarely feels dramatic at first; it feels gradual and almost normal. What makes these cycles repeat is the belief that each empire is unique. Differences in culture, technology, and ideology create the illusion that past examples no longer apply. Yet the underlying pressures remain the same: resource limits, human ambition, and resistance to change. Empires rarely fall because of one decisive moment. They fade as systems designed for growth fail to adjust to stability. History repeats itself here in slow motion, following patterns so familiar that they are often ignored until the cycle completes once again. Throughout history, widespread health crises have followed a familiar pattern. Despite differences in time, location, and medical knowledge, societies often respond in similar ways. Early warnings appear, uncertainty spreads, and hesitation delays decisive action. One of the most repeated issues is preparedness. Plans may exist on paper, but real-world readiness is often limited. Resources are stretched, coordination is unclear, and responsibilities become fragmented. These weaknesses are not usually created by the crisis itself; they are revealed by it. Public trust plays an equally important role. Clear communication helps societies respond calmly, while confusion creates fear and speculation. History shows that when messages are inconsistent or delayed, trust weakens. People struggle to know what to believe, and cooperation becomes more difficult. Another repeating pattern is the assumption that modern knowledge guarantees control. Advances in science and technology create confidence that past outcomes will not repeat. While progress does improve response capabilities, it does not eliminate uncertainty. Overconfidence can reduce urgency during critical early stages. Social behavior also follows familiar paths. Some individuals act cautiously, while others underestimate risk. These differences are not new. Similar divisions appeared in past crises, shaped by perception, access to information, and personal experience. What makes these repetitions hard to recognize is timing. Early moments rarely feel historic. Decisions seem temporary, and delays feel reasonable. Only later does the full pattern become clear, revealing missed opportunities and avoidable strain. History does not repeat pandemics to punish societies, but to remind them of unresolved habits. Preparedness requires continuous effort, not reactive measures. Trust must be built before it is needed, not during moments of pressure. In these moments, history quietly repeats itself not because lessons were unavailable, but because maintaining readiness is easy to postpone when the danger feels distant. When people look back at major conflicts, they often describe each one as unique. Different nations, different eras, and different technologies create the impression that every war has its own special cause. Yet history reveals a quieter truth: many conflicts begin for remarkably similar reasons. Tension usually builds long before open confrontation. Competition over resources, influence, or security creates pressure beneath the surface. Diplomatic language becomes strained, trust weakens, and small disputes take on larger meaning. These early stages rarely feel dramatic. They feel political, procedural, and manageable. Fear plays a central role in this pattern. Nations often act not only on what others are doing, but on what they might do in the future. Defensive actions are interpreted as threats, while hesitation is seen as weakness. Over time, caution turns into suspicion, and suspicion turns into escalation. Another repeated factor is overconfidence. Leaders may believe that strength, preparation, or strategy will guarantee quick and controlled outcomes. Past successes reinforce the idea that risks are limited. History shows that this confidence frequently underestimates complexity and long-term consequences. Public narratives also follow familiar paths. Simplified explanations replace nuanced realities. Complex situations are reduced to clear divisions, making difficult choices easier to justify. Once momentum builds, reversing direction becomes politically and socially costly. What makes this repetition difficult to notice is the language of progress. Modern tools and systems create the sense that past mistakes no longer apply. Yet while methods change, decision-making pressures remain consistent. Ambition, fear, pride, and uncertainty continue to shape outcomes. Wars rarely begin because history was unknown. They begin because familiar pressures feel unavoidable in the moment. Only later does the pattern become obvious, revealing how closely present decisions mirrored those of the past. History repeats itself here not through inevitability, but through choices made under pressure, choices that humanity has faced many times before. Throughout history, social divisions have followed a familiar pattern. During times of uncertainty or rapid change, fear often rises alongside it. When people feel insecure about their future, they look for clear explanations and sometimes, clear groups to blame. These divisions rarely begin with open hostility. They often start subtly, through language, assumptions, and narratives that separate us from them. Differences that once seemed minor become emphasized, while shared interests fade into the background. Over time, distance replaces understanding. History shows that fear is a powerful tool. When people are worried about stability, safety, or opportunity, they are more likely to accept simplified explanations. Complex problems are reduced to human causes, and exclusion is framed as protection. This pattern has repeated across cultures, eras, and social systems. What makes this repetition difficult to recognize is how ordinary it feels while it is happening. People believe they are responding logically to threats, not repeating old mistakes. Each generation convinces itself that its fears are new, justified, and unavoidable. Social divisions tend to deepen when communication breaks down. Rumors spread faster than facts, and emotional reactions overpower careful discussion. Once trust erodes, cooperation becomes harder, even among groups that share long-term goals. History also shows that these divisions often weaken societies from within. Energy is spent on conflict rather than solutions. Progress slows as focus shifts from shared challenges to internal disagreements. By the time consequences appear, divisions have already become part of daily life. The repeating lesson is not that disagreement is harmful, but that fear-driven exclusion carries long-term costs. When societies allow fear to define identity, they limit their own ability to adapt and grow. History repeats itself here quietly, not through dramatic events, but through everyday choices about who belongs, who is heard, and who is left out. And often, these patterns only become clear after the damage has already been done. Throughout history, societies have depended on natural resources to grow and prosper. From fertile land to clean water and stable climates, the environment has always been a foundation for human development. Yet time and again, the limits of that foundation have been overlooked. In periods of expansion, growth is often treated as proof of success. More production, more construction, and greater consumption signal progress. When these gains are immediate and visible, long-term environmental costs are easy to ignore. Damage accumulates slowly, often out of sight. History shows that environmental consequences rarely arrive without warning. Signs appear early: reduced resources, changing conditions, and increased vulnerability. However, addressing these signs usually requires restraint and long-term planning choices that feel costly in the present. What makes this pattern repeat is the belief that innovation will always provide a solution. New methods and technologies create confidence that limits can be overcome. While innovation can reduce harm, it cannot fully replace balance. When consumption outpaces renewal, systems become unstable. Environmental strain often affects communities unevenly. Some experience consequences earlier, while others remain insulated for longer. This uneven impact can delay collective action, as the problem feels distant to those not yet affected. By the time damage becomes widespread, recovery is difficult and expensive. History shows that many societies responded only after conditions worsened, when options were already limited. Collapse or forced adaptation followed patterns that had appeared before. The repeating lesson is clear: growth without sustainability carries hidden costs. Progress measured only by expansion overlooks the systems that support it. History repeats itself here not through sudden catastrophe, but through gradual imbalance. When societies treat nature as unlimited, they repeat an old mistake, one that generations before have already encountered and struggled to undo. Every generation tends to view itself as more informed, more capable, and more prepared than those that came before it. Advances in technology, education, and communication reinforce the belief that past mistakes belong to a less developed time. This confidence is understandable. Modern societies have access to vast information, powerful tools, and historical records that previous generations lacked. These advantages create the impression that repetition is unlikely, that lessons have been learned and systems have evolved beyond earlier failures. Yet history suggests otherwise. While tools and knowledge improve, decision-making pressures remain surprisingly consistent. Fear, ambition, competition, and optimism continue to influence choices in familiar ways. When faced with uncertainty, people respond emotionally as often as they do rationally. What makes this pattern repeat is selective memory. Societies remember victories more clearly than warnings. Success stories are highlighted, while gradual failures fade into the background. As a result, confidence grows faster than caution. Each generation also faces new challenges that appear unprecedented. Because the details are unfamiliar, comparisons to the past feel inaccurate or irrelevant. This belief creates distance from historical lessons, even when underlying patterns are similar. History shows that progress does not guarantee wisdom. It changes the scale and speed of consequences, but not the nature of human judgment. Mistakes are rarely repeated out of ignorance, they are repeated out of confidence that things will turn out differently this time. The lesson is not that advancement is meaningless, but that it does not replace reflection. When societies assume they are immune to repetition, they become less likely to recognize warning signs. History repeats itself here through belief rather than failure, the belief that being more advanced also means being exempt. And that belief, repeated across generations, quietly resets the cycle once again. The most powerful reason history repeats itself is not ignorance, but assumption. When societies believe that certain events belong only to the past, they stop looking for familiar patterns in the present. This belief creates silence where awareness should exist. Many of history's repeating moments do not feel dramatic while they are unfolding. They appear ordinary small decisions, delayed responses, and familiar routines continuing as usual. Because nothing seems urgent, attention drifts elsewhere. What makes these repetitions so difficult to notice is how reasonable they feel. People trust systems that have worked before. They rely on stability, experience, and precedent. Confidence replaces curiosity, and questions fade into the background. History shows that warnings are often clearest in hindsight. Patterns only become obvious after outcomes are already visible. By then, societies are left asking how something so familiar went unnoticed for so long. This quiet repetition is not driven by fate or inevitability. It is shaped by choices made when pressure feels low and consequences feel distant. The absence of alarm allows cycles to continue uninterrupted. Recognizing repetition does not require predicting the future. It requires observing the present with historical awareness. When similar conditions appear, similar outcomes become possible. As we reach the end of today's story, one idea remains. History does not repeat because it must, but because it is allowed to. The past does not return loudly. It returns softly, disguised as normal life. And perhaps the most important lesson history offers is this: once repetition is noticed, it can be interrupted. Awareness does not change the past, but it can reshape what comes next. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.